Okay. Welcome, friends. We have
Hello.
the first of three sessions on geopolitics, globalization, and regionalization. I'm Manoranjan Mohanty. Three of us, well, today, two of us are listed, me and Viktor Eszterhai.
Good morning. Yeah.
Hi,
Okay.
Viktor.
Hello. Hi,
Hi.
everyone.
So this is great. Finally, we are seeing each other. I don't know when we can meet in person. Great.
Next year, definitely.
Since Victor is going to speak in this session, I'm going to be the main moderator. The next session, which will be after the lunch break, Margia Casolari will be the main moderator. And then the third one, the last one today, Victor will be the main moderator. And they, both Margia and Victor, have very kindly agreed to have a holistic view of all the three sessions and report to the final reporting session of the conference. So I will just take a minute. Sorry, let me switch off my mobile. Sorry. Geopolitics, I have an essay questioning the concept of geopolitics and why not geocultural, geoeconomic, geo-civilizational. I have a colleague who has a whole perspective on Chinese and Indian history on geo-civilizational perspective. But the reality is that policymakers and bulk of international relations writings take geopolitics as very important. Of course, we respect space and spatial identities, but whether spatial identities is political in the narrow sense, this is the nation state era in which geopolitics as a concept has emerged. So that is the preliminary point I would like to make. But we are free to look at geopolitics from various viewpoints, and these three sessions will address some of the specific issues from specific geographical regions, and in order to have a holistic view of the NAM perspective on contemporary world situation and analysis of contemporary world problems, especially the COVID-related global environment and the future, it is important to have a very specific view. But while making a specific point about a specific issue and a region, please try to relate it to the larger question, which the concept note of this whole conference and Darwish's introductory remarks indicated. So with these preliminary words, I will suggest that each one of us takes 15 minutes. At the end of 12 minutes, I'll give you a smile, indicating that you have 3 more minutes, because we do want real good discussion after the presentations. So with these words, may I welcome, and the first 1 minute, please introduce yourself, because we don't have the CVs of everyone. I will start with myself. I'm a former professor of political science, Delhi University, and I write on Chinese politics, Indian politics, comparative development, and global transformation. That's me. Also deeply involved in civil liberty issues. So with these words, let me welcome, and I hope by the end of the day, this community of these 3 sessions participants would have formed, in fact, some closer understanding of one another. Thank you. And with these words, let me invite Isabel Cabana to speak on Japan's cultural diplomacy to Latin America in the 20th century.
Okay,
Isabel.
Thank you so much, Professor, and hello to everyone. Nice to meet you all. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, my name is Isabel Cabana. I'm from Chile, and I'm currently doing my research in a PhD program here in Japan, in Kyoto, Japan. This is the evening, so I hope I can join the next sessions, but if not, please excuse me in advance because of the time difference. And well, what I want to do today is to present the case of Japan's cultural diplomacy in Latin America. Basically, to give like a general overview, a general background, but mostly to present some preliminary reflections I have about it. I'm currently researching on Japan's cultural diplomacy in Chile. In the case of Japanese language programs, this is my topic, but I needed to study first the general background, Japan's diplomacy in general and cultural diplomacy in particular to the region, to Latin America, and understand the main patterns and dynamics. And in this, I found that Japan's cultural promotion to Latin America has had a particular characteristics. The nature of the relationship of Japan and Latin America has been different, and certainly devoid of the historical burden that connects Japan to its Asian neighbors. After World War II, and especially since 1990, the goal of Japan has been to strengthen the political and commercial ties with Latin America, as is perceived as an area of investment, cooperation, and partnership. And for that, cultural policy has focused on bridging Japan to the region by means of cultural exchange and language education, among others. The 21st century, however, have brought new actors and factors to this interplay, like the growth of the Nikkei population, which I will explain, in Latin America, or the presence of China and South Korea's cultural diplomacy and soft power in the region, all of which have presented new complexities and dynamics that may be altering Japan's approach to the region. This work, what I want to do today, is to offer the preliminary findings and reflections about Japan's cultural diplomacy in Latin America in the last 2 decades by reviewing the most important policies based on the analysis of the documents from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And well, I will try to be brief, so that's why unfortunately I will not be able to go deep on certain issues, but I hope to show you the main ideas. So I want to share now the screen. Can you see?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, first of all, I would like to explain briefly what I understand by cultural diplomacy. I cannot give you like the whole discussion, but basically just what I mean by it. And it's the use of cultural means to enhance a nation's political influence. And there are many examples of the use of culture by states and countries in the contemporary history that have intended to convey positive image abroad. One of the resources that is used often these days in cultural diplomacy is language, for example, or exchange programs. In the case of Japan, this has been framed mostly by the idea of mutual understanding. And as I will show, the idea of exchange and language instructions. As an overview, diplomacy during the 20th century between Japan and Latin America, from Japan to Latin America, has been shaped by 2 features: migration and the fact that Latin America is a region of natural resources and market. As I will explain, Latin America more than 100 years ago received many Japanese migrants, and they created a community, many communities in the region that developed into what is called today the Nikkei community, the Japanese descendants abroad. And because of that, the relationship of Japan with the region has been shaped by this connection, mainly migratory connections. But also Japan, and this is pretty much framed in every single diplomatic blue book from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Japan sees the region as an area of natural resources, food resources, energy resources, and mineral resources. But during the 90s especially, it started to frame it also as a market. But during the decade after the Cold War, Latin America was facing a lot of issues in terms of democracy, the return to democracy, and the liberalization of the economy. And Japan was sort of awaiting for the region to be more stable. And the reason that why it survived during the Cold War, it was very stable relation, but mostly because Japan adopted a pragmatic approach, thinking that the relation of Japan with Latin America has been pretty much shaped by the relationship with the United States. So basically, Japan focused mostly on economics, not so much in politics, and through the assistance of in terms of development and investment. However, in 1992, Japan started to address the issue of mutual understanding, but the focus, as I said, was mostly democratization, supporting the democratization of the region, the liberalization of the economies, issues about the environment and disaster management, but the promotion of mutual understanding. However, there was no big programs or policies regarding culture in particular. But Japan saw the region as a potential region for the 21st century in terms of the geopolitical importance. But as I say, in terms of cultural diplomacy, no major programs beside the one that already existed that was mostly how to say, the high level kind of exchange. The most important institutional actors that have played a role in this relationship between Japan and Latin America in culture has been Japan Foundation, that arrived to the region in 1975 with the two offices in Mexico and Brazil. Particularly in South America, there is only one office of Japan Foundation, and it's in Sao Paulo. Why Brazil? Because Brazil has the biggest community of Japanese descendants outside Japan. Also, JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agency, has played a big role since the 80s in the region about assistance and cooperation, and in particular with volunteers that have come to the region and volunteer in areas of education mostly. And what I've been looking at a lot is the role they have in Japanese language instructions. However, in the past 2 decades, and this is very interesting what I started to see in the change of the context, for Japan, Japan's diplomacy to Latin America has been shaped by these two issues as well, migration and resources, but Japan has started to frame it a bit differently and more concrete during the past 2 decades, and specifically in the role of Nikkeis as bridge. And I will explain when this sort of changes, and the idea of resources, Latin America as an area of resource, and regional significance, especially when Japan started to see and understand that Latin America comprised 33 countries, which is, I think it's the 17% of the UN total of countries, but also all the regional frameworks that started to appear in the 90s, especially in the 2000s, that could help Japan to gain some support in the international arena. But Japan didn't frame that before. It's only from the 2000s onward when Japan started to see that Latin America was not only about resources, it could have political relevance. And then the cultural diplomacy also shifted as a region. Latin America individually has importance for Japan, but Japan always addressed the diplomacy to Latin America as a region. The same with ASEAN. It has particular issues with particular countries, but in general address it as a region with specific actions. And particularly, I want to focus on two, which is the role that Nikkei started to play in Japan's cultural diplomacy to Latin America, and how they started to frame the role of Nikkei in the diplomacy. Nikkei, as I said, are the descendants of Japan abroad. And in Latin America, there is a huge community, particularly in Brazil and Peru. And today they make up around 60% of the total of Japanese descendants abroad, only Latin America. There are around 2.1 million people. And many of those descendants came to Japan in the 90s to work. Third and fourth generation of Japanese are currently working in Japan with the Nikkei visa. So that started to affect the way Japan saw the role the Nikkeis could play as a bridge, and they framed it that way in the diplomatic blue books, and the role they could play as in the understanding of Japan. Actually, in 2013, which is the decade they started to talk more about the Nikkei, they said they are thus important diplomatic assets for Japan. Nikkeis are highly appreciated by the people, and this is by the people by Latin America and the Caribbean, contributing to the pro-Japanese sentiment in the region. This is 2013. And I want to show you why this happened, particularly in 2010. During the 2000s, Japan had three pillars in Japan's diplomacy towards Latin America: strengthening economic relations, contributing to the stable development of the region, and cooperating in the international arena. That remained quite stable during the 90s and 2000s. However, the increasing presence of China and South Korea in Latin America might have been one of the factors, along with the Nikkei presence, that started to change the approach of Japan in this regard, particularly culture. Japan addressed this by saying Asian countries, particularly the People's Republic of China and Korea, have attracted attention for the rapid pace at which they have expanded their relations with the region in the recent years. And this is actually true. In the past 2 decades, China, through the Confucius Institute, have settled and established many institutes throughout the region. Actually, the regional center of Confucius Institute to Latin America is in Chile, Santiago de Chile. And they have come to all the countries to stress the instruction of Chinese language. And they have been very successful in that sense.
Isabel, 3 minutes.
I'm finishing, okay. And the same has happened with South Korea and the Hallyu movement, the Korean wave, that have also been materialized through the instruction of Korean language and other cultural policies in the region. And many books have come with that have tried to address the issue of the Korea's and China's presence in the region. Sorry. And here, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Japanese government asked for a budget in 2012 when they recognized the issue about China and Korea and how they see that Japan is losing presence in Latin America, especially in the image they have, the positive image, and how they've been losing over the years the ranking, their presence, the positive image in comparison with China and with Korea. And then in 2012, they included for the first time an issue about culture in their Japan's diplomacy toward Latin America by promoting Japanese values in the region. And then the role of Nikkeis were therefore very important. In 2014, Shinzo Abe, the former prime minister, introduced the policy Juntos, which is the first encompassing policy, cultural policy towards Latin America that Japan has verbalized in the 21st century. Juntos means together, and it's divided in 3 pillars: progress together, lead together, and inspire together through exchange programs. In 2017, Japan created a Japan House in Sao Paulo, Brazil. There's only 2 more in London and Los Angeles. And its purpose was to communicate the various attraction policies and efforts of Japan to a wide range of people, including people who know very little about Japan, and to enlarge the base of the people who are interested and well-versed in Japan, meaning addressing the issue of the image of Japan and the mutual understanding. In 2018, Shinzo Abe introduced now a new improved policy, which is the enhanced connectivity, and where include wisdom that also foster exchange with the region. So I'm finishing. There are many issues that I would have loved to show you, but it's interesting to see that in the past 2 decades, compared to a whole century, Japan has not only changed, but started to address more actively the issue of culture. And one of the things I started to notice is the role that they thought the Nikkei could play in this new Japan's cultural diplomacy in Latin America, based on the distinctiveness, what it makes Latin America different for Japan compared to other Asian countries in the region is the presence of the diaspora and the migrants and the role they can play in the Japan's cultural diplomacy. And also the sort of translation of this, balance of power between these countries translated into another region, which is Latin America, and how Japan is reacting and sort of changing its approach to the region based on these new actors. So it's interesting to see that in the past 5 statements of the past 5 years, Japan has changed the rhetoric of which address Latin America, thinking about how Latin America not only can be an economic area, but also political. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Now we know the meaning of juntos, together, and how the Nikkei, the Japanese diaspora in, probably the diaspora may not be the right word, but it's very distinct character, this Japanese descendants in Latin America, their role, and how there is a new shift during the last 10 years in diplomacy with emphasis on culture. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Isabel, thank you. Our next speaker is Flavia Lucenti. Well, we have a paper on China now. The China threat, an unnecessarily forward-looking posture.
Hello.
Flavia.
Nice to virtually meet you.
Thank you.
Isabel, I really appreciate your presentation. Well, today I would like to speak with you about a topic that is not really about your politics, but mainly refers to political psychology. But I hope that you find interested to. I would like to share my presentation. Can you see?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So yes, the topic of my presentation is the China threat, and which I define as a necessary forward-looking posture. And I will explain you why during my presentation. So let's start by saying that starting from this 2017, when Xi Jinping was appointed as president for his second mandate by the Chinese party, a concentration of power may occur in his hand, to which also follow a revival of a sort of an asserting posture of China, which was somehow interpreted by the United States as something that could be challenged for its national security. So in the meantime, also in early January, President Trump, that was elected in 2016, come to the president, his office began. And one of the first things that he did in foreign policy was that of impressing a negative turn in the relation with China. Indeed, what happened in the Trump's narrative, it was that China was no longer represented as a strategic competitor for the United States, but it became a threat to the entire liberal world in its storytelling. So it brought about to a spread of the perception that China as a liberal country, but like an actor that somehow would undermine the liberal nature of the international order. And it obviously brings some damages to China's reputation as a potential reliable partner for the West. So here I select 4 points that I detached as more important to understand how the storytelling elaborated by the Trump administration changed through years. So at the beginning of Trump presidency, we can see that Trump mainly focused his narrative on the idea that China represents a threat, speaking about trade. Indeed, he accused China of unfair trading practices and also of intellectual property theft, as well as not conforming to the international standard like the one that was established to the WTO, to which China belonged to. So one of the most important things is that through time, this kind of perception changed, and from reprimands China for being an unfair economic partner that also damaged the United States economy, Trump began to accuse China for being a threat, as I said before, to the entire liberal political model. And he started to focus his storytelling on the idea that China violating human rights, mostly referring to the question of the Uyghurs, as starting from the early 2008, the news that there are unfortunately still in the Xinjiang region some concentration camp for educated Uyghur peoples captured the attention of the Western media and in the Western political debate, also in the United States. And then he started to accuse China for not respecting liberal values, as was occurring during the demonstration that started in June 2019 in Hong Kong, when China advanced the proposal for the extradition act that caused great social upsurge in Hong Kong. But more curiously, starting from 2020, Trump changed again his storytelling, speaking about China, and he started to speak about China not just a threat for the state, not just a threat for the liberal values, but also a threat for everyone, for individual person. Indeed, what Trump began to say was that China was spying on Western using of TikTok, as well as when the COVID-19 pandemic broke out, was infecting the world, representing a threat to everyone's health. So this kind of Trump diplomatic line exasperate the relation the United States with China, and indeed provoke the reaction of China. Indeed, what we assist in recent years, mostly starting from the late 2019, was a new kind of diplomacy that was branded by the Chinese government as the World Warrior diplomacy, recalling the famous blockbuster that was very known in China, indeed, the World Warrior. And through this kind of diplomacy, basically, the Chinese government was trying to encourage its spokesperson and diplomats to have a fighting spirit, and so to defend the national interest in international affairs more assertive, and also having a more self-confident posture. And it happened mostly basically through social network, Western social network that actually are forbidden in China, like Twitter. And the spokesperson for the Chinese foreign minister also used this social network to answer to the reprimands, to the blame that come from Trump and Pompeo, especially defining it as the product of a bias with regard to China, and considering and branding as fact distorting. And in turn, they also began to accuse the United States of unfair conduct. Indeed, we can see in this Twitter published by, for example, Zheng Shuang, that the United States were accused of pursuing double standard in international affairs, on not fully respect human rights, neither at home, neither abroad, and also they focus on the inability of the Trump administration to deal with the pandemic when the pandemic comes in the United States. Indeed, I would like to share with you this tweet that was published by Xinhua, that is the official state-run press office of the party of Beijing. This tweet was published on March 20 of 2020, of course, and is titled, "Trump eats his own words on coronavirus." Why? Well, since this post was published, the main intent of the government was that of demonstrate how easily Trump changed his mind on the pandemic. And it went from saying how the USA greatly appreciate China's efforts to contain the epidemic within the borders, to naming in the midst of the epidemic spread in the United States of COVID-19 in the middle of March, to naming the the COVID-19 as the Chinese virus, or even the Wuhan virus, that obviously sounds like a sound of racist expression, and also accusing China of creating the virus in a lab, but without piece of evidence, but just to discredit China. So the clear intention of this Xinhua threat was to demonstrate a kind of schizophrenia of the President Trump as a synonymous of the unreliability of the Trump administration. So basically, what have been the repercussion of this kind of blame game to start between China and the United States? Well, one of the most important and outstanding features was that it caused an impoverishment of the political language. Indeed, this kind of verbal fights were just aimed at damaging the other's reputation. But even more important, it caused anxiety in the West about a new threat that were brought to the mind of many experts of international politics that suddenly they come back to speak again about the idea of a new Cold War, like if the world was on the verge again of a Cold War, but which this time see China as the rival to the United States. Sorry, and it actually became a very current topic as it practically dominated the headlines of many articles published in some Western newspaper for at least all the second part of 2020. Well, it also happened, especially in the United States, that all those who have talked about China rise as a threat, for example, Graham Allison with his book, The Thucydides Trap, that was very famous in the United States. Well, all these people will turn in unheard prophets as the situation that you rise was getting more and more real. But The point of my research, that actually is still ongoing, is that to demonstrate that this narrative that leaves China with no choice other than be portrayed as a threat to the liberal world might depend just on the United States' fear of losing its position. Representing China as a threat, indeed, is mainly functional to the United States narrative to preserve its dominance, as depicting China as a destabilizing actor and a real partner and so on, actually is a way for saying, yeah, we are the best. But a sociological approach to the storytelling inquiry would suggest that this kind of prophecy, as it was interpreted in the Western debate, becomes self-fulfilling just whenever the agents tend to frame what happened in a context which they are familiar with, as if they actually contribute to the occurrence of an event that originally was only supposed. So by investigating Trump's narrative, what actually stood out is that what is happening during this president was actually that he effort to depict more and more China as a threat and not just a competitor, and until it provoked the reaction of China that assume a more self-confident, assertive, and sometimes even coercing posture. So if you look at the situation of the recent month this way, maybe the fact of representing China as a threat would become not just an unnecessary forward-looking posture, but also a less trustworthy story. Indeed, according to this logic, it is likely that the idea of the nuclear war also might be distorting the thought, and it causing an overshadow of other interpretation of international affairs, reduce them to the sole rivalry among great power, just depicting a scenario in which great power can compete in each other and not leaves other type of interpretation and opportunity and option to this. So and I would like just to say very briefly that I found this kind of expression, that of a nuclear war, also an appropriate definition, since the Cold War, as we know, as other features, like a nuclear weapons race that is not occurring between China and the United States, neither a battle for an ideology. But the problem was that using this definition is provoking the spread of a framework in which China and the United States and their region are described as an ideological battle. And this is increasing the level of incommunicability between the United States and China. So this is my conclusion. I would like to say that, as Lampton affirmed, conviction can be enemy of the objective reality. And I guess that this, we as a scholar of international relations, of political study, always have to keep in mind. But it also have in practice some negative repercussion on reality. And in this respect, the depicting China as a threat is a self-fulfilling story, but not looking for a poster, because it's preventing a dialogue, a genuine dialogue among great powers. And these are short thinking about what could be the effect of the nuclear war. As I said before, is framing the competition between China and Russia China and the United States into the frame of the ideological battle, but also is encouraging the perception that we are on the verge of a war. So it's encouraging the system of a warfare scenario that, however, might have consequences that are be more uncertain and unpredictable than when China was just depicted as a strategic competitor by the United States. So, as we are observing now, the Biden administration is attempting to turn again this narrative and come back to depicting China no longer as an enemy, no longer as a rival, but just as a strategic competitor, as it occurred during the years of the Obama administration. The fact is, and this is still an open question, what will be the China reaction now? So thank you for your attention.
The mic is turned off. Hello.
Oh, thank you, Flavia. Yes, sorry. this story, in fact, you saved 1 minute. This story of this change from strategic competitor to the China threat and threat to the entire liberal world. I think that story is very well depicted. Thank you very much. I'm sure there will be many interesting questions, especially about the Chinese reaction to this. Thank you very much. And our next presentation is by Ouyang Xiangying, The Enlightenment and Reflections on China's Road in 70 Years. Wonderful. Are you there?
She's not here. She has Zoom issues, so she will not participate.
Oh,
So.
And she's from where? Is she from China? She's from China?
I think so.
Okay. Oh, it would have been nice to have her. In fact, I have a book on exactly this topic. It's called China's Transformation, the Success Story and the Success Trap. Anyway, it would have been interesting to hear her. Well, next is Viktor. Viktor Eszterhai. Limitations of Hungary's Eastern opening policy in the light of the world systems theory. Viktor, tell us a little about yourself. Did Flavia speak a little about herself? Or no?
Sorry.
Flavia, take a minute to tell about yourself.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Roma III, and my research interests, as you can imagine, are Chinese
Of course.
and Russian international relations.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Viktor now.
Thank you very much, Manu. Of course, thank you very much, Chair, to be
Thank you.
My name is Viktor Eszterhai. I'm an assistant researcher of the International Affairs and Trade, which is a kind of a think tank of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But this is a new position for me. Previously, I worked for several other Hungarian universities and other think tanks as well. So, but I still following my previous research on China and mostly focusing on the perceptions of China and also the problems of dealing with China, with special interest on the structural characteristics of these problems, how to deal with China. So this time as well, I will also gonna talk about this topic. So the title of my presentation is The Limitations of the Hungary's Eastern Opening Policy, which more or less means the foreign policy of China in the light of the world systems theory. So probably those who are interested in European politics, you could recognize in the last few years that one of the most well-known figure became the Hungarian Prime Minister in the European politics, despite Hungary is such a small country. But he is now a very ambivalent and very controversial figure in the European politics, with harsh statements on several topics. And one of the most well-known and often investigated foreign policy direction of him is its special affiliation and special relationship with China. In Hungary, we call it as a new foreign policy direction, which was introduced in 2012. And this is in a nutshell, we call it the Eastern opening, which means that the country decided to have a more Asia-focused foreign policy in the latest decade. So in my presentation, I'm going to focus on three questions: that what could be the purpose of the Hungarian government's China-friendly foreign policy direction, and then I try to evaluate the results of this China-friendly foreign policy, and finally I'm going to focus on the problems and those structural questions which are important to involve into this question to fully understand the picture of this problem. So the first question is why the Hungarian elite thinks that they needed to introduce a new foreign policy direction toward China and toward Asia. I had a quotation from the Prime Minister. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Just a second. So I have a quotation from the Hungarian Prime Minister, and if you read this through, you would recognize that he see the 2008 financial crisis as a kind of a turning point. So he argues that after the 2008 financial crisis, the world won't be the same as it used to be, because this is not going to be a US-centric international system anymore, but we are facing toward a multipolar international system. And therefore, he argues that all small countries have to understand the new trends of the system, the international politics. Therefore, Hungary has to find a new foreign policy direction in order to be a winner of these new trends. And he does not specifically say that mostly have to focus on China, but because China was the biggest rising actor in Asia, technically this mostly means that the country have to rethink its relationship with China. And this seems to be a very new phenomena for a country which, after the fall of the communism, was so much Western oriented. So Hungary was accepted to the European Union. We became part of the NATO, and all the major structures, Western structures, were accepted by the Hungarian elite and the Hungarian society as well. So from this point of view, this new situation was quite strange. And there was an argument to support this new foreign policy direction, is that the Hungarian elite was not satisfied with the results of the 1990s and early 2000s. So they were not satisfied with the situation of Hungary could achieve within the Western-centric international system. So therefore, they say that maybe this new trend will provide an opportunity to Hungary to achieve a better position. And when I'm talking about that was not satisfying with its position within the international system, we have to turn to, for example, Wallerstein's free structure core periphery model to understand what I mean. So I don't have to explain in details this model to you, because in this circle this is quite well known, but just in a nutshell, Wallerstein sees the world as a coherent unit, and countries and some regions can be divided into different categories. There are the core countries which have the newest technology, they have accumulated capital, and so on, and they are able to invest abroad via their national companies. Contrary to the core countries, there are the peripheral countries which mostly participate in the global trade with minerals and some raw materials and so on. And between these two categories, there are the so-called semi-peripheral status, which they, based on their cheap labor force, mostly doing manufacture production, big quantity manufacturer production, mostly with the older generation of technology, which are invested in these countries via the multinational corporations of the core countries. And if you want to judge the position of Hungary within this structure, it's not an issue. It's not a question that Hungary is a semi-peripheral country, and not just Hungary, but the whole Central Eastern European region, because compared to the Western European core countries, Hungary and this region is still an underdeveloped part of Europe. When we experienced the fall of communism in the 1990s, the GDP per capita was around 50 to 60% compared to Germany. And it's not a big surprise that still we have the same level of GDP capita compared to Germany. So despite the big talks about we will be integrated in the global market, the liberal reforms and so on, the situation of Hungary did not really change too much. So many argue that it's better to call this region a kind of dependent market economies, because the share of the EU within their trade can be between 60 to 80. In Hungary, it's more close to 80%. Or if you investigate the FDI, 80% of the share of the European Union, especially the European core countries like Germany, can be close to also 80%. So Hungary was successful and integrated into the global value chains, but it was integrated as a semi-periphery, mostly based on cheap labor force, and it was integrated via the so-called German Central Eastern European manufacturer core. So from this point of view, the Hungarian elite could define that they are not satisfied with the status of Hungary. So after the financial crisis, they saw the multipolarization process in the international arena as a kind of a chance to grab in order to break out from this semi-peripheral status. So in order to understand, to answer the first question, that what could be the intentions of the Hungarian elite, is simply this: to try to achieve, to grab this opportunity to break out from this dependent status from the core Western European countries. So if we have to raise a hypothesis in these cases, we can argue that the Hungarian elite mostly wanted to have a better economic opportunities with Asia, especially to grab the opportunities to increase trade with China, and in this case, especially mean export, because that would provide an opportunity for the Hungarian companies to reach the Chinese market, which can accumulate profit in Hungary. And from another point of view, they wanted to attract Asian and mostly Chinese FDI, but not just simply FDI, those kind of FDI which helps to make the Hungarian economy more high value added producer. So this was the major aim of the idea of the Eastern opening policy. So in my hypothesis, I'm going to investigate the result of this decade-long new foreign policy direction. Of course, in my methodology, I will analyze data, and I conducted several interviews in the previous years. So I did not want to specify in this case, but I will share the results regarding this. So one of the first findings is that despite the big hopes and the big opportunities which were seen by the Hungarian political elite, there was not too much development in the case of trade. So if you investigate this figure on the right, you will see that there is not too much growth in export. And of course, the trade balance became worse because we imported a lot from China, and that was more or less growing. But we do not experience the boost of export. And what could be the reason behind this phenomenon? This is really interesting, and this made the Hungarian political life very stressful, because they felt that, okay, if we will able to make better political relationship with China, our trade will automatically boost due to this political act. But this simply did not happen. And the reason is that if we understand the logic of the Wallerstein model, is very simple, that Hungary has a dual economic system. One is the local companies, which we can label Hungarian national companies, but those are not able to produce anything which is globally competitive. But on the other hand, we have globally competitive companies, but those are multinational companies which are really able to reach the Chinese market. So based on my interviews, I can state to you that Hungarian products are reaching the Chinese market, especially, for example, the Hungarian automotive industry is globally very competitive, but that's a German automotive industry which was placed in Hungary to produce Mercedes, Audi, and so on, other famous brands. So based on our interviews, we found that 30 to 40% of the productions which are produced by German multinational companies in Hungary are able to reach the Chinese market. But this does not appear in the Hungarian statistics, because this appears in the Hungarian export to Germany due to the very complexity of the global value chains. So, and this shows to the Hungarian government that, okay, we want to increase our export, but we have no able to interfere into the multinational companies' decision-making. And the other branch of the Hungarian economy is simply not competitive globally. So, for example, Hungarian agriculture producers will never have a chance to reach the Chinese market. The second, what I investigated, was the foreign direct investments in the case of Hungary. And despite the big hopes again, there was no major development. In 2019, less than 3% of the total foreign direct investments in Hungary came from China. And if you compare it to Germany, around 30% of the total FDI is coming from Germany. And there is a list of the major Chinese investments in the Hungary. And if you're focusing on the sectors, you will see the reason what is happening here. You will see the reason why the FDI is not growing, because only those Chinese companies are coming to Hungary, which finds the cheap labor force in Hungary competitive in order to reach the European market. But to be frank, China still have cheap labor force at home. So therefore, the Hungarian economy is not so competitive for the rise. Only all those sectors can be seen on this list, which they still supported the semi-peripheral status of the Hungarian economy. So no research and development came to Hungary. No high elevated production really came to Hungary. The same sectors as the German multinational companies invest for can be identified in the case of China as well. So I just want to jump on my conclusion.
Okay.
It seems very simple in principle that we are entering to multipolar system, which means that there will be not just one center to attract FDI and to increase trade opportunities. But in reality, these structural elements, which I think the most painted well by Wallerstein model, give a reason to understand the structural reasons that diversification of your economy is not so simple. So if I have to conclude in one sentence, I would say that it's not impossible, but nearly impossible to break out from the central periphery relations, and multipolarizations and the new actors in itself would not guarantee that this is possible. So the most important thing is how will you use your own capital? How will you use the technology you can achieve? So the Hungarian elite should not simply or blindly believe in this, that China or the new rising actors can change the status of Hungary in the next coming decades. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Viktor. Very interesting conclusion, particularly that this is not going to change. This multipolarization has not been able to change the core periphery relationship, and Hungary is in the semi-periphery. We will have some interesting questions also on that. Thank you very much. Now, the last speaker is Seema Parihar. I don't see her in our group. Is she there? Or she has gone to the gender section? Well, in that case, we have a lot of time for discussion. We can I mean, all the three presentations on the Japanese cultural diplomacy towards Chile, then the change from strategic competitor framework to China threat framework in case of US during the Trump period, and the very interesting case of Hungary trying to overcome, but not successfully, the semi-periphery or peripheral status in the world system, despite joining the Western Bloc in an enthusiastic way and developing very close relations with China, particularly in trade. And there are some theoretical questions in each of them. I think I will also reserve some of my comments to each one of you. Let us have our participants first to make comments or raise questions, who will go first? Yes, Devendra Kumar, please introduce yourself and then ask your question or comment.
Well, thank you, Chef. First of all, thank you very much. I really like this presentation by different panelists. I am Devendra Kumar. I am a senior research fellow at the Center for West Asian Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. I'm sure all of you, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I have a question to Flavia Lucent. I really like your presentation and the way you compared the China's threat and the US, what was going on, and how Trump was using this COVID and Chinese virus and trying to label and scapegoat from the kind of situations and things he had produced within his own country. And you have talked about various Chinese strategies like their wedging strategy or wolf warrior diplomacy that China is using these days. So I want to know, since you focus more on the US part of it, but I want to know, how do you view the Chinese threat towards India? Because since India has voted in favor of World Health Assembly resolution to find out the origin of this virus called Chinese virus or Wuhan virus, and India along with Australia voted in favor of that resolution. And for that, we saw a Chinese aggression on our borders, primarily because of these acts and the US support to us in terms of our involvement in the South China Sea and other regions. So what's your take on that? How do you view the whole situation? Thank you.
You want to come in now or take more questions together?
As you prefer. If you want, we can collect more.
Yeah, you can continue. Yeah. You respond. Yeah.
Okay, so Devendra, thank you for your question. I have to be honest, actually, my research focus on not on India, but I guess that I agree with your point of view. I'm totally agree. And what I can say about that speaking about China and somehow searching on what is the China posture international affair, mostly I think that this point of view is that of reiterate how domestic affair, and it also domestic domestic posture in foreign affair has to be that of having a nationalistic posture, and on the other end avoid any other influence. So China demonstrate to be somehow, I can say, but to not be allowed and to not be welcome any other interference from other powers on what are the questions that regard its own national security. That is a very strategic point in its foreign policy, and even more the importance of this even increased in the last year when China decided to assume a more assertive posture in international affairs. So I'm sorry, I know that my answer is not really answering to your question, but it's not my field of experts. So.
Okay, thank you. I could say something on this, but I think we have other occasions to discuss that.
No,
yes.
Sir, we would love to hear your views on this. Please share your views.
No. No, very brief. I think she's right about the assertive nationalist posture from China. Therefore, for the last more than 10 years, the Chinese have been trying to assuage fears about China threat. First it came in Southeast Asia, then slowly there was a discourse on the China threat, and they had this theory of peaceful development of China without being a threat to any country. But Trump really exacerbated that whole process, and now Biden has decided to rectify that. In case of India, by the way, today's story you must have read, of course, in the newspapers. They have agreed, our commanders have agreed to have simultaneous, phase by phase, disengagement of the troops on the border. So that is the big story today. And of course, from April to July, both the countries were, very in statements more on the Indian side, and in the Chinese side only some forums, and more on the social media in the Chinese side, there were many hostile, highly hostile statements, both in the media and among the popular expressions and so on. But after a while, after the defense ministers of the two countries met in Russia, the foreign ministers of India and China met in Russia, and both India and China joined the SCO meeting and BRICS meeting, RIC meeting, and so on. RIC is Russia, India, China. Things have come to a certain framework. And 2 weeks ago, addressing the All India China Studies Conference, the Indian Foreign Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, he propounded a 3-8 principle that, in a Chinese style, because he's also a China scholar and he has served in China and he knows China very well. 3 mutuals and 8 specific points of respect, which are very normal, confidence building measures. So now things may have stabilized into a framework which will not be status quo ante April 2020, because I think the two countries have reached a certain clash of nationalisms, two assertive leaders in power, both trying to project their countries in the world and so on. And there are many other reasons, many other reasons for this particular framework to settle down for the near future. But in other words, it can deteriorate up to a certain level, but a certain level of interaction, including increasing trade and the cultural exchange and mutual consultation and common issues on global issues like climate change, pandemic, and so many such things. New international economic order. Nobody's talking about that among these official circles, but at least reforming the WTO system and the UN system and so on. On that, they have a lot of common grounds. So that is where it stands today. I'm sorry, I as chair should not monopolize speaking. Next question, please.
Okay, could I?
Yes, please.
Okay, my name is Gracjan Cimek. I am from Institute of International Relations in Polish Naval Academy in Gdynia in Poland.
Thank you.
Thank all 3 speakers for very important, essential, inspiring presentation. I have a question to Flavia Lucenti. Do you see the building of special strategical relations between China and Russia as an opposition for United States, which are trying to defend their losing hegemony and try to counter the growing role of China? From my perspective, the developing relations between Beijing and Moscow, we could name it as a counter-hegemonic alliance, and that is the reason, one of the most important feature that United States are now so afraid that world which was leading by Washington from 1991 is going down. Okay, and to Viktor, we know each other from a conference, a very interesting issue. I'll also use this Wallenstein perspective, and I have 2 questions. When we use this model of Wallenstein, how you named the position of China, Russia, and Hungary? No, Hungary, of course, you named as a semi-peripheral, of course, but the the world built by capitalistic centers, of course, means that the Western capitalist states was a ruler. But now situation is changing, and how using these categories we can name today's position of China and also Russia. And second question, are there any examples that Hungary opposition to the Brussels or Western decision was supported somehow by China? Because it is also very important that not only economical aspects are very important when the strongest economical centers use their power to pose their will to the weakened one, but also these political aspects. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. No, before you answer, I think Devon has a question. So let us take one more question. Viktor, you have a question or you are going to answer?
Yeah, sorry, I would also have a question, but Devon can...
Later. Okay. Devon now, please. Devon. Please unmute yourself, Devon. Devon, please. Devon,
okay, so my question is for Isabel.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay. So the question is for...
Oh, you have to unmute yourself. Now we can't hear you.
Maybe
we can't hear you. Yeah, now we can. Yes. Now Devon, come in.
I'm not sure. I think there's an issue or something with the internet. Okay. All right. So yeah. So I'm Devon. I'm from Hokkaido University of Education. So I have a question for Isabel-san. It's the first time that I've actually heard this cultural diplomacy being touted from the perspective of Nikkei, because I've actually met quite a few of them here in Japan, and my impression is that they really have a very difficult time adjusting even when they're here. Unlike myself, who don't really look Japanese, it's quite difficult for someone who looks Japanese, has a Japanese name, and then they don't speak Japanese. And then there are also issues with not acting Japanese as well. So if I look at China, Korea, and Japan, if you look at it from music, for example, K-pop is much more popular in relation to J-pop and C-pop. And I'm thinking that for Japan, there would probably be more success from the perspective of sports, because if you look at China, Korea, and Japan, baseball is much more linked to Latin America, and Japan is very well known in baseball. And the other aspect would be education, because a lot of universities in Japan actually has many graduates around Latin America. Lots of them have student associations, friendship societies, etc. So my question is, as opposed to education, sports, and stuff like that, where do you see, or how successful do you see this cultural diplomacy going in relation to Nikkei?
Okay.
And what do you think they can achieve?
Okay. Now, Viktor, you ask your question, then we will invite you later for answering. Yes.
I would like to ask my question to Flavia. That we have an ongoing research in Hungary about the COVID narratives. and the perception of these different COVID narratives in Hungary. And one of the most interesting results is that there were only two, Chinese and the American narrative on COVID, or at least in Hungary. And this is quite surprising, despite the European Union is talking a lot about the strategic autonomy and so on and so on. And could you give a reason that other rising actors why are not really able to provide a narrative, for example, such a nervous issue like COVID? So what could be the reason behind this, that they're not enough effective to provide a narrative for this situation? And for example, this is also true for India. So maybe others can also comment on this, that why they were not really able to dominate the narratives, because
Sorry, Viktor, to interrupt you. I lost the first part of your question because my connection didn't work where it was.
Okay, so we had an ongoing research on that, what is the Hungarian perception on COVID, and we recognize that there were only two narratives, the American one and the Chinese, also in Hungary. And there was no, for example, European Union narrative on COVID, which is quite surprising because we were in a very unpleasant situation and so on and so on. But my question is that why are other actors are not able to provide narratives which would be able to compete with these two others? So, thank you.
Any other question? Any other question? Or we may have a second round, maybe. Now we can start with Isabel. You can answer, the question raised by Devon from Hokkaido.
Okay, thank you, Devon-san. And I think the question you posed was very interesting. Actually, for me, the Nikkei issue is very interesting. My master dissertation was about that. I focus on the history of Japanese diaspora in Americas, particularly Peru. I'm Chilean, but I studied the Peruvian case and the Peruvians Nikkei in Japan. And to look at the history of Nikkei in Japan is a very, complicated issue because of what you mentioned. There's a lot of issues about human rights and discrimination, ethnic racial discrimination that the Nikkei people lived in the Americas as being Japanese in the Latin American countries, and then in Japan again as being Nikkei and not fully Japanese, and not being able to talk Japanese, have the last name, as you mentioned, look Japanese, but actually talk either Portuguese or Spanish, being Catholic and dancing samba or marinera, but not being Japanese. So in that sense, it's very interesting how Japanese government started to frame the role of Nikkeis as bridge, as essential to the trust that Latin American countries have towards Japan. They have been working on Japanese diplomacy for decades. So it is a very functional perspective of the role of Nikkei, and very recent. So in that sense, is because I've been working with Nikkei in Chile as well, they see the role. They see themselves having a role in diplomacy, but not probably in the way the Japanese government want. Is more like in their own history and memory as a community, and how they, especially on the idea of identity, but not so much on a political or diplomatic level. So this is interesting because what I see so far is a sort of disconnection between what the government wants from Nikkei and what the Nikkei wants for themselves and to this sort of homeland. But there has been a lot of work, and I think what they can do in the way or the moment they can meet is through the networking initiatives that have been happening for the past 10 years. A lot of networking, national networking of Nikkei, and the Copani, which is the Latin American networking of all the Nikkeis. So I think that has a potential use as a cultural diplomacy resource, but maybe in the long term. I don't know if I answered. maybe
Sure,
your
sure,
question.
sure.
Okay,
Thank you, thank you.
thank you.
Who is next? Flavia, please.
Thank you for
Yeah, Sana's
Thank you for your
question.
question.
Yeah.
Well, Roshan, I will start with your question. Well, actually, your question will deserve a long talk because it's a very huge topic and also very interesting, but it's difficult to answer in in few minutes. Well, I will try. As a political psychology, I would say that there are two ways of looking this partnership between China and Russia as opposing to the United States. And probably the more ponderate, the more measured evaluation is in the middle. On one hand, if we look to this alliance, maybe we will call it also like that, of China and Russia in the face of the United States, yes, it could be dangerous and it could be an opposition and somehow challenging the dominance of the United States in the world. And if you read all the strategic papers, sorry, the strategic documents that have been published on that, starting from the strategic partnership that was signed by China and Russia in 1996, you can see that this looking for multipolarity in the world actually could be interpreted as a threat by the United States, because in a multipolar world, the United States is no longer in the middle. So on one hand, the answer is yes. On the other hand, the answer is also no. Why I would tell you this? Because looking for a major plurality in the world does not be interpreted as a direct threat to the United States. What I would like to say with that if you analyze actually what the Chinese leadership and the Russian leadership say is that they're looking for recognition. They're looking for a place, a world in which they have a room for acting as a great power, because we are talking about two actors that self-represent themselves as a great power and feel that they deserve this type of recognition on the international scene. So probably it's both the case. So obviously looking for a multipolarity is a threat for the United States, but mostly the effect, I would say, not the cause. And going to the question of Viktor, I'm not really agree with you when you say that there isn't a strong European narrative on COVID-19. The fact is that yes, there isn't a narrative by all the European countries together, but each country is elaborating its own. And I would just mention that in Italy, the narrative about the COVID-19 is so strong that the current governmental crisis that we are living now passed with little notice in the media and among people. And this is why all the people are freaking out just for the pandemic, because there is this obsessing narrative that say people stay at home, be care about yourself and so on. And politics is like now is a second stage problem, you know. And then, yes, I'm looking for COVID-19 narratives also in other countries, especially in Russia. And I was surprised how Putin was able to turn also the COVID-19 narrative to his way of reconstructing history. If you heard the message that the president addressed for the end of the year, of this year, it said that the problem of this COVID pandemic was that it's affecting this living veterans that are still alive, and that one of the most important regrets somehow was that due to the COVID pandemic, Russia was unable to celebrate the celebration indeed for the Second World War, 9 of May. So it's pretty, I think that is curious, and it would deserve also other research on this. And then I actually trying to do some researching from the COVID-19 narrative in Africa and Latin America, since I have some close friends that live there. And the point is that when there isn't a COVID-19 pandemic, my point of view is that because the government somehow want to deny the fact that there is a COVID pandemic because he wasn't able to manage it, or because he's scared that it somehow can damage his economy or the social texture of its society. So this is why they opted to not talk so much about the COVID-19 pandemic, also because they have other bigger problems, because don't forget that this COVID pandemic also, it's country that are still really poor and they have to face with other problems every day. If I may, I have a question for Isabel. I don't know if I can ask it now or maybe later.
Yeah, you can ask now.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to ask you, Isabel, if you consider in your broader research linked to the concept of cultural diplomacy, also the concept of soft power. And if you recognize some similarities between these two concepts, and if you think that the Japanese government is also conducing some power action in Latin America. And the second question is, if you do trace some difficult to spread the Chinese culture abroad in the world, as it was provoked somehow by this Japanese identity that tend to be to particularism. Thank you.
Okay, we'll come back to Isabel in a moment. I will also ask a question later on. Now, Viktor, to answer various questions.
Thank you very much. And thank you. The question is great. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think it's a very challenging issue how to remodernize this model because the world is really changing. And I also, when I used to teach it in the university, at the university, I told my students that probably China and is a very specific issue because we can define different regions within China. So we should give up this concept that China, we have to place China in one of these free label, periphery, semi-periphery, or core countries. I would define east coast of China as a core now because they are able to produce the next generation of technology. They are able to do high quality services, and they already started to enter into global services. They accumulated a lot of capital, which they are able to invest in other parts of the world. And this does not mean at the same time that the central part of China can be labeled as a semi-periphery, mostly doing mass production of manufactured products with the technology and the capital invested in the eastern part of China. And the western part of China can be still labeled as a kind of a periphery. So if you accept this categorization, for me, I would say China is a very problematic country to define into only one category. But I think this is a country for 1.4 billion people. So we can create these subcategories within one country, and that could be quite proper. So if you think about the eastern coast of China, that's a population of 200 to 300 million people, which already started to enter into the same GDP per capita of many in the European Union countries. So I will argue that this model can be still very useful to investigate the global economy and the role of some regions and countries in this case within the global economy. And yeah, you're right. Russia is an exemption because Russia is still not fully integrated in the global economy. Some elements of its economy is integrated, like if you think about the gas or oil export of the country to the European Union, this seems to be very much like a periphery, to be frank. So the raw materials make a major role in the foreign trade. So that's a kind of a symptom for a periphery. So as an actor of the global economy, Russia is more or less like a periphery. But from another point of view, you still have the capacity to do research and development, not all fields, of course, but in military and some specific fields. So it's hard to label Russia as a periphery, a core country, or a semi-periphery. I would argue that the most integrated part of the Russian economy into the global economy, it shows the major symptoms of to be a periphery. And from a longer point of view, this is also the tragedy of Russia. So probably we discussed this. Russia is also highly connected to the fact that its role within the global economy is decreasing. So yeah, I accept China is a great power.
Okay.
Sorry, Russia is a great power as a political actor. It's a superpower, still a superpower with a superior military. But in a longer term, due to these economic factors, the role of Russia necessarily.
It's 16 hours.
Sorry.
Do you agree with him that it is a counter-hegemonic alliance?
Between Russia and China?
Russia and China, yes.
Yeah.
That was his question.
So they have a common goal, and that's the United States, to undermine the leading position of the United States. So from this point of view, they don't like each other, don't have to love each other, but if they have the common strategic goal, that can be a good reason for cooperation. And if I may give a historical example for this, France and Germany did not like each other. But after the Second World War, they started to cooperate with each other because there was an external threat for them. And I don't say that this will be the same in the case of Russia and China, but the more they cooperate with each other, the relationship will be stronger. And you also had another question to me sorry.
Yeah. Yes, carry on.
Yeah, the other, that whether we have experienced any opposition act against China, of course, yes, because Hungary is traditionally balancing, is doing a kind of a balancing strategy. So we call it its Eastern opening as part of a multi-vector foreign policy strategy, which seems to be quite evident for a small country. Of course, so for example, the case of the UN voting or within the World Trade Organization, in most of the cases, the anti-dumping voting, we vote together with Germany. Because we are part of the German manufacture core, German centrist European manufacture core. So in some specific cases, we of course work together with Germany against China. And of course, we are in a military alliance with the United States, which also means that in many cases, we try to please our American partner as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I think we should conclude soon because we can carry on, of course, till another half hour. But anyway, I'll have one question to each one of you. Isabel, cultural diplomacy often uses a hegemonic view of culture represented by the ruling establishment abroad. China, Confucius Institute, whereas, China also has Buddhism, has Islam, has popular religions, has Christianity, and so on. No doubt Confucius was the most prominent philosopher and most prominent influence. I have no quarrel with that, but the point is, if through Confucius Institute, the plural tradition of a country is communicated. Imagine if India is only known as a Hindu country. That's what is a big debate within the country in India today. We have so many of us would like to see India as a country of many religions, even Hinduism having many sects and many strands. So Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Islam, popular religions and so on. In case of Japan, religion doesn't seem to be a dominant theme. It is education and exchange of people and using diaspora or Japanese origin people, Nikkei, and so on. But to what extent the image of Japan's culture is communicated to the rest of the world? And very quickly, in comparative diaspora studies, how would you compare the overseas Chinese and China's policy towards them, the overseas Indians and Indian policy towards them? These are big, big diasporas in different parts of the world, and particularly in the Americas, and the Japanese approach to diaspora. So those are my two questions to you. To Flavia, I mean, all of you had excellent papers. I think Xi Jinping has projected China. Of course, he has abandoned the Deng Xiaoping line of foreign policy of biding your time and so on, but has gone to a very high level of assertiveness. And so from China Dream, national rejuvenation, the two centenaries celebrations, to the 2035 goal and the 2050 or 4950 goal. In other words, that is a self-declaration as an aspiring great power. So even if Biden goes back to strategic competitor position, and you know that Trump's position has a lot of support within the United States, and that is going to be a big problem for many months at least. Therefore, do you think there is some objective basis, not only in the US, but in many parts of the world, to be alerted, if not alarmed, by the Chinese assertiveness? To Viktor, Viktor, are you there? Yeah. Wallerstein's framework, I'm a fan of Wallerstein, I also use that. But I think as the world systems theory and the dependency theories and the whole debate, Paul Barron onwards, and in India we have many votaries of this whole school, Prabhat Patnaik, Amit Bhaduri, and others. I have, my position is that Wallerstein's can be a component of a dynamic framework of understanding layers of power and domination with multidimensionality of basis of power. So the economy, technology, military power, and today the communication power, and I think Samir Amin's last few writings contributed to this discussion very much, where he went beyond the original world systems theory. Therefore, the layers of power and how they are implemented or exercised without obviously threatening you, and therefore they get a lot of support in many countries, among the elites particularly, and that is why and when you answer Flavia's question about soft power, you will say something about it. Therefore the so that was to Isabel probably. Therefore, I think we have to use Wallerstein, otherwise, but transcend Wallerstein in some ways. Is the whole because you just applied a core periphery, semi-periphery to countries within, regions within China. That's a real discussion of generalization. That's true. Then the American inner city would be, we always say that is part of the third world. Okay. So the complexity of dependency and independence, just as we have given up the comprador bourgeoisie concept, you see, similarly, a core periphery concept has to be refined in terms of acknowledging the complex way in which dependency and exploitation are working today. Well, we can start with Isabel briefly.
Okay, thank you for your questions. Okay, regarding the first question about to what extent this image of Japan is being conveyed, and mostly based on the idea they have of culture, I would say that there is this is part of what I'm researching these days, is there is a disparity, not a disparity, but like a huge difference from what Japan think of himself as a country and Japan actually is perceived worldwide. And because I'm working mostly on Latin America, many of the surveys conducted in Latin America, they think about Japan as many things, but these days Japan is working a lot and playing a lot with the idea of its popular culture. And so the portrayal of, well, let me organize my ideas. So basically, in post-war Japan needed to reorganize its cultural diplomacy based on what did and happened in Asia. And there was a distance from Japan as a unique country and the things that made Japan special. But during the 70s and the 80s, Japan regained this there was a resurgence of the nationalist perspective, and Japan started to portray an idea and an image of being unique and special, and unique in its homogeneity. And Japan is Japan and the country of the Japanese people, a homogeneous people, ethnic people, and the Japanese language. And that is the resources it has been tried to use for the past decades. And these days it incorporated the idea of pop culture as well, animation and music, and the language itself, and the idea of cool Japan. So today, basically, they are working with the idea of cool Japan. But the idea Japan has in the rhetoric and discursively of itself, it tends to be different according to surveys of what Japan is actually perceived as. And so I would say that there is still a gap between what Japan wants to portray and what the Japan is being perceived, especially in Asia. I would say Asia, it has a conflicting and dualist idea of what Japan is. Many people in Korea and China, according to surveys, they perceive Japan as still the imperial country. There is a lot of historical memory attached to the idea of Japan. But many young people still think about Japan as the cool Japan, and they watch anime and they listen music. So this is what Ott Masgin scholar says. This is sort of the dual perspective of Japan. So I would say that there is a gap. And regarding the second question, Japanese policy towards its diaspora, it has been definitely, I would say, different from what China. And I would say China in particular has approached Chinese diaspora and Chinese overseas in a different way, more actively, as Korea as well. Korean diaspora in Latin America is very big, and Korean government has also approached its diaspora in a different way. Japan took a different perspective. Until 1945, the Japanese overseas were Japanese. But in post-war Japan, when Japan stopped being an empire, and there was a distance in the second, third generation, because Japan has an idea of homogeneity, they felt that they were no longer Japanese, and the state of Japan started to address the people abroad as Nikkei. So this is very interesting because Japanese government has been one of the few governments that address their people, its people abroad with a different name. And whereas China or others still refer to their people as Chinese. So I would say that the Japanese approach is a bit different, and historically can be seen particularly in the 20th century, pre and post-war. I don't know if I could answer your question, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You know, my video is off because of the connection problems. Okay, now, yeah, Flavia.
Thank you, Professor, for your question. Well, very briefly, I think that nowadays we can split the world in two parts. And on one hand, we can find the countries that hope to take advantages from having partnership with China and taking advantage from China's rise. And among them, I think that we can mention, for example, Eastern and Central European countries, and also Central Asian ones. And on the other hand, there are countries that are pretty scared about the rise of China, consider it as a threat, and are worried about because they think that China could be somehow a destabilizing actor that can change the status quo. And I think that I'm not wrong to mention among those states, the United States, India, and Japan. But the point is that the biggest challenges over time, I think it is that we have to face with China and find a way to deal with it, because China is no longer a raising power, is a great power nowadays. So I think, yeah, that the biggest challenge, as I said before, is now finding a way to bargain those rules that are fine with everyone, with every state, with every major state, and create a sense of legitimacy around them, because otherwise it would be very difficult to have a dialogue among great power and even bringing forth some type of cooperation or also multilateral action. And I think that is in this very case, the civil war in Syria is demonstrating the inability of the international community or society, whatever we want to call it, to finding any solution to some crises that are really threatening the peace and the security of the international order. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, the conference.
Thank you, thank you. Well, Viktor.
Yeah, so thank you very much for your question, because to be frank, currently my major research interest is complex interdependency. And when I sent my abstract to Darius, I was thinking to which aspect of my research should I focus on. So my major interest is that whether can China break the interdependent relationship between Germany and Hungary, and this is a highly asymmetric interdependent relations. And for my research interest is that could China somehow interfere into this relationship, and what could be Hungary's strategy and in this asymmetric dependency with Germany? And one of my arguments is that for the Hungarian government, due to the structural reasons, it's not really possible to break the interdependent status of Germany. But China is a very good kind of a reference to point on it in order to try to influence Berlin. So in many cases, this is a very extremely pragmatic approach the Hungarian government is doing, that does not really necessarily believe that China would be able to break the dependent status of Hungary, but that's not necessarily a short-term goal. You can refer it in order to ask more money from the European Union and also from Germany. So this is a kind, this can be identified as a kind of a tactics to understand this complex interdependent relationship what we have with China and with the global markets. So yeah, so I fully agree that from this point of view, Wallerstein model is a bit outdated, but this can point out or underline the structural problems of why China cannot be really be a survivor for Hungary, or at least that's how I see.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I think we had a wonderful session. There were 2 absentees, but the 3 Excellent presentations made our discussion very meaningful. Thank you all very much. And indeed, we have formed a community of scholars under the NAM inspiration, beginning with this session on geopolitics. May I now conclude this session, and those who are in Europe go for lunch break. Rest of us for tea or dinner. And we will meet in the next session after nearly 1.5 hours. Okay, thank you all very much.
I won't be able to join you guys in the second session. I'll be with Latin America and the Caribbean. So I wish you all the best in your second session.
Thank you. Thank you.
Me too.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In the next session, Margia will moderate, and we have several papers from India. I think Devendra is having a paper there, right?
Yes, yes, sir.
And also from other continents. Yeah. Okay. See you a little later. Thank you all very much. Thanks again, Isabel, Flavia, and Viktor. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
And good questions. Thank you.